No, go back. As we open up a can of liquid transition. Oh, don't open like, don't have that pressure behind it. Open up a can of liquid transition. Damn, that's pretty damn refreshing. Divine day. Blessed be to your day. May it be everything you require. Create everything that you desire. Understanding that healing is destructive. You are deserving, but you're not entitled. In this level of darkness, this honesty is going to take you into a space of darkness to really understand the aspects of you. I wanted to get into, I'm going to do some readings. But I've been thinking, and for those that know me, it's like, I'm always thinking, but today I was really, over this last couple of weeks, I've been really thinking, especially putting together everything for the classes coming up, putting things together and putting things in play. And I was thinking about, I heard something and it was talking about like the recession. There's a recession coming and all of that good stuff. But I never really understood the need. I never understood the need for the recession. Remember, you got to accept the yeses just like you must accept the yes just like you accept the no. This is no different. When we're thinking about that, when we're thinking about this space with ourselves of this emotional recession, the understanding and looking at our resources and what resources that we've used to get ourselves to a certain space. That's your trauma, how you dealt with your trauma, how you've avoided your trauma, how you've masked your trauma, the identities that you created based on your trauma. These are the resources to how you use your emotions. It's kind of like if you tell somebody, I've talked about this before, think about it like this. If I sat inside of my space, I'm sitting inside of my space and really assessing what my job meant, how I made money, why I made money. I've talked about it before. The video is probably not even on my page anymore. It's on my YouTube channel, Godico Alchemist. When I redo this video, when I re-edit the video, I'll put those links in there. And I'm thinking about, one thing that I thought about was the definition of money. The definition of money and what money's naturally backed by. Money's always backed by a resource. And we always say the American dollar ain't shit. The American dollar ain't shit. It's not backed by anything, but it's backed by something. The American dollar is backed by something. Like you can go to the American dollar, the dollar that you spend every single day is backed by something. It's backed. It's backed by something. It's backed. That's why it has value. That's why you put in, until you understand this, or until I really understood this, I didn't realize that that's what was backing my dollar. My trauma is what backed the dollar. It was it was the resource to my emotions. My emotions backed the dollar, the money that I made, the way that I made money, how I made money, how I sustained my environment, and everything into that nature. And then it made me think further into, I'm no longer a product of my environment. because I'm not at that space anymore. I'm no longer a product of my environment. My environment is a product of my conditioning. My environment was a product of my reconditioning. Think about this. And this is just a spill while then I'm gonna let it fill up. Due to not learning or not going through the process of healing, the process of healing is relearning. What are you relearning? The process of you becoming conscious, you becoming aware, you're spiritual, whatever moniker you want to put in front of it or use as your title. Ultimately, you're now developing. You have to come into the state of developer mode. The generator, operator, destroyer. Okay, you're a god. You're a goddess. You're a titan. You're whatever the fuck you want to be. But you have to think about this to this. You have to start thinking. It's not about what you're thinking anymore. Remember, it's about how you're thinking. Why you're thinking that. Why that comes up. What is the resource that you continuously use to set your parameters and set your space? One of the major examples for me is ingesting the healing process and me providing the services, me providing therapy, me providing services, me providing therapy, me doing the things that I do. I had to understand that I couldn't use the old resources to set the tone for my new atmosphere. I had to stop using my old tones or the traumas, because all that brought was the same atmosphere. That let me know that I still needed to breathe the same. I still needed the same atmosphere. This is your first time coming in, or you've heard me say this before, the aspect of like me marrying myself, and really understanding that the aspects of me coming into marrying myself, be coming into that balance with myself. New keys for new doors. I had to understand that in this new unification of myself, I had to be able to, from the masculine aspect of myself, that's what sets my tone. That's what brings forth the tone. That's how I establish and enforce the tone. My feminine aspect is what sets the atmosphere, the emotional, what I'm receiving. It's similar to if you grew up in this. I was born in the country. I was born in the country in a rural area. And then when I moved to the city, my breathing was different. There was less trees. Or if you're in a different altitude. I'm in a different altitude now, so I breathe differently. What I take in is different. How I eat is different. How I sleep is different. Everything is different. So it requires a new tone. But in order for me to set those new tones, I had to go through the recession. Because without the recession or the crisis, I couldn't assess. I wouldn't take any assessment. Here was the thing though. A lot of times we do this. It's since we're used to trauma. We're used to trauma setting our tone. We're used to the negative setting our tone. We're used to that pressure. And then we're used to that chaotic atmosphere. We only do things until that dissipates. Until we get used to the atmosphere. So we can breathe again. But if you study anything, you want to study anything with health, it's like just because it's not killing you directly, just because it's not, you dropped dead, fell out, doesn't mean that it's not killing you. Doesn't mean that it's not killing, that doesn't mean that it's not killing your ass. It's like, use an example. just because I'm eating a certain type of food, let's say like, that's because I'm eating fried chicken. Let's say I go grab some fried chicken. Just because it's not killing me doesn't mean that it's not cutting me off from something. That doesn't mean that it's not going to cut me off from something. Just because I can say, okay, I'm a product of my environment. I'm from the hood. I'm from the hood. I was in the streets. That can't be used at different altitudes. Using that line in a state of reconditioning, I can't get to I can't set new tones, because all of my tones got to be set in that type of atmosphere. So everything that comes into my space is based on that atmosphere. So then I started really assessing this, going through the healing process, understanding where I'm at now, building new systems, building new structures. I can't keep using the same aspects of myself where it was based on, at first, it supported me based upon trauma. The support was based on trauma. So, use an example of you dealing with family members. And the family members support you when you doing ignorant shit, you doing wild ass shit, you was in the streets, you had a girlfriend, you was kids and everything in that narrative, everything that fit inside of that space. But as you evolve, you're going to start realizing that what you're searching for inside of this space, based on where you came from, where you were at, is just simply recognition. This is why I've broken down before. Once you start your healing process, once you go through the rearing process and you go through your healing process and you're assessing a lot of these childhood wounds and assessing a lot of these generational aspects of yourself, your family's no longer your family. They're simply related to you based upon the trauma. So now your acceptance of them is not going to be based on relation. As long as you're still, as long as I was still seeking acceptance from them, it was always had to be based upon relation. So now naturally inside of that space in your human construct that you create, this is where we get into the space of you sitting there and you in the best shape of your life. You've been working out. You could have went to the gym every day of the week. You working out, you eating better, but then the first thing that somebody notices and says with you, like, but yeah, you've been working out, but I mean, you still here at this job with me. Or you still coming to the same house. Or you still coming to the same spot. Recognition. That can dishearten some. That shit would fuck my head up. Cause I'll be like, they're right, they're correct, they're telling the truth. But I wanted to say to them, like, nah, man, it's different. I had to accept that they were recognizing where they were at. They were recognizing where I was at. And they were forcing me, they were challenging me to myself. It was a challenge for me to look and assess, instead of me sitting inside of that space and wanting to be like, nah, see, this is why I don't be doing this. The motherfuckers always gonna hold you down. Niggas always gonna be haters. Niggas gonna do this. Niggas is envious. Nigga, I'm trying to make these moves. But I had to really start thinking, why did that trigger me? Why did that trigger me? In reality, the reason that shit was triggering me is because I didn't create the new system yet. I was still in the learning phase. I was still in my learning phase. Though I saw results of me going to the gym, though I saw results of me going to school, though I saw results of me working on the aspects of something new, even to the point of when I came into the point of the last 3 years, like me working on the podcast, me learning how to make music, me learning how to put music together, me doing things of that nature. the first thing that you're looking for based on the traumatic experience, and when you get triggered, you're looking for recognition for look at what you can do. It's the attention for that inner child aspect. It's that validation for that inner child aspect. It's you're still holding on to certain functions. You're still holding on to these old functions with yourself to be recognized for, to be accepted based on the new relations, the new aspects of yourself that's unfamiliar to them. See how the family aspect goes into that new support? So you automatically running around, you're searching, are you searching for, I had to ask myself, was I searching for recognition or was I searching for support? Because support's going to take me outside of my comfort zone. I would deny support because I was not used to how support was coming to me. Support was coming to me in the most uncomfortable ways. That means if I said, yo, I need support, and then somebody would ask me the question, okay, what you need help with? And in a moment they were like use an example for me building my company. Someone comes to me and they're like, hey, do you have your company? Like, oh, I see you doing your company. I see you doing your thing. But have you trademarked your brand and your name, your company name and things of that nature? Man, that's not what I asked for. I was asking like, what was I really asking for? What was my definition of support? And was it based on recognition for what I already did? See, a lot of times when I was sitting inside of that space, you're not seeking support, you're seeking recognition for what you've already done. Based on, and that automatically becomes aspects of the past. Yeah, I did this, and this. So I gained, instead of me looking for the recognition for what I've done, because I recognize what I've done, I confirm what I've done, I confirm where I'm at. Now I can sit in that current space and I can build from this current space and accept things without things having to relate to me. I can accept things without that need for the relation. So now I can expand myself into the discomfort. This is very big for us, especially in our fucking community, where we keep sitting there saying to ourselves, man, fuck that shit, man. I'm gonna wait until my homeboy got my homeboy, he do shirts or he does this or he does shit like this. I'm gonna wait until he available to go do this. Meanwhile, you didn't walk down the street or you didn't drove past a building. You didn't drove past somebody that actually does that as their business. That's their business. That means they've built the system that is necessary to sustain that and maintain that. So when you go into that space, you can learn more of the foundation rather than just the surface. But that all goes into the depth of yourself. Remember, I always tell you, this healing work is destructive. That's me having to go deeper into myself. Because now with me, using an example earlier on last year when I was really building my platform and my company, a lot of the things that I was trying to have access to, my access was different because my mindset was different. So now I'm going into spaces where it's like, okay, cool. I need shit that's going to trigger me to be uncomfortable. So use an example of me, season 1 of the God Hour podcast. when I was doing season 1 of the God Hour podcast, those beats that I used on the first episode of the God Hour podcast, it was like freebeat.com, and it was like a 3-minute loop or a track or 2 minutes or a couple of minutes. I could use it for the intro. I could use it for like the opening into a podcast episode, shit of that nature. But I couldn't expand it because I didn't understand how to loop a beat. I didn't understand none of that shit. But instead of me reacting, this was a lesson for me, because at first I was reacting like, fuck, this shit ain't gonna sound, it's not gonna sound professional. It's not gonna sound good. People aren't gonna support me because it ain't gonna sound like I've been doing anything. Because I still was holding myself to the standards that were based in my trauma. The way that I used to work back in the day, being that workhorse for the job and basically working until I was burnt out. I wasn't getting that burnt out feeling. I wasn't getting that burnout feeling. I had to understand, like, damn, like, why am I looking for a burnout? But my burnout was really just me giving up. My body telling me to shut the fuck up and sit. My body was always telling me the same shit. Sit the fuck down. Relax. Focus. Learn. But I was so used to that conditioning. I was so stuck under this conditioning process of it should do this, this, and this if I do this, this, and this. I was so used to the 9 to 5 mentality, that 9 to 5 box. If I put in this much time to this many hours to this much, then I should get this. So I was still stuck inside of that process. I didn't understand how that formula came together. As opposed to me now, I can sit down after I wake up, do everything I need to do in the day. I can sit down and it'll take me 15, 20 minutes to make a beat. Take about 15, 20 minutes to make a beat that's necessary for what I need it for. Quality for me to do for me to record over, to speak over with the podcast. Set the tones that I need to set. Because now I'm not looking at it from that place of lack. I'm not looking at it from a place of lack anymore. I'm looking at it from a place of me being whole. You need the emotional recession. The emotional recession is when everything that used to go good and, okay, you will wake up, go to work, you're waking up, you're going to work, you're taking care of your kids, you servicing your partner and all of these aspects, and that shit don't seem to go right anymore. Because now you took in new information. That emotional recession point is needed for that information to be embedded. You need the emotional recession, because it's going to help you dive in to those old resources that you used to use and apply it so you can move that shit out of the way. That is now your block. It's always been a block. It's the same step, the same pedestal that you put yourself on for being a real nigga. The same pedestal and the same steps that you put yourself on for being independent and being so strong and being so resilient. That's the block. That's the same fucking block. That's the fucking obstacle now. That's what's holding you back. That's what was holding me back a lot of the times. That's what kept me in that lower states of my complexes in order for me to say, okay, cool, well, it's because of this, this, and this. That's what kept me from feeling the emotion. That's what kept me from actually establishing myself. It was always my fault. This is the power of fault. This is the power of fault. Of saying that it's my fault. It was the power of me saying this is my fault that triggered me at first to deal with the lack mentality. It was my fault that I carried forward and kept reconditioning myself to live or exist in the lack mentality. It was my fault that I kept using my traumas as the catalyst for my reconditioning, for my reactions. It was my fault that I kept using the rational, the way I rationalize things based on reaction to recondition my environment to always fit that environment. So now you got to look at the things that you've been doing it with. After a point in time, it's like if my mindset's always like I'm always helping out people and giving my all to people and I don't want nothing in return, but I'm tired of being burnt out and I'm tired of being used and I'm tired of being a good person. Sometimes I want to be the bad guy and all this shit. So basically in my mind, I'm saying I'm good until. I'm a good person until this happens. I'm a good person until this happens. I'm a good person until this happens. Then what am I? Now I don't want to accept the bad aspects, because those negative aspects inside of that space, where did I learn them from? The same space where I learned good. Hey, Nancy. The same space where I learned my definition of good or created my definition of good was in the same space where I learned my definition of what was bad, what was negative, what was wrong. That compass. And until I understood that aspect or deal with that aspect, I would basically live inside of the recession. I would basically live inside of the emotional recession. See, a lot of us live inside of the recession. We live inside of the recession. We like to live inside of the chaotic space. We like to tread inside of that space because it feels normal to us. That altitude or that atmosphere of that normal space, of that being under that pressure, in that grind. It makes us feel something. It makes us feel something like, hell yeah. As long, it's like kind of, you're not there no more. You're not there no more. You're not there anymore. I couldn't keep using those elements as my catalyst for what I was doing. Because what happens when those catalysts no longer exist? What happens when the catalysts no longer exist? What happens when it no longer exists? Now I got to create something else. Something as simple as use this idea in that space. If I'm sitting inside of my space and I'm like, okay, cool, I am the aspects of my mother, the aspects of family members in that narrative. As long as I'm not dealing with it or it's unresolved, that's what I mean by that unresolved. As long as it's unresolved in my past, I can always make a plan based off the unresolved. That plan based on the unresolved will keep me in the future tense of the result. So I'll distance myself from the result because I'm distancing myself from learning these aspects of this process of healing. So I don't sustain myself in the now. So now I got to create an identity to maintain in the now. I must project myself into the now. This is where you come into the aspects of that you want to be a good person. You want to be a good person, hard worker, your whatever identity that you took on. But that identity is a falsehood. This is what I mean by the identity becomes a falsehood. You need that emotional recession. That underdeveloped process of where you are at right now, and you are now developing a new system. You're developing that new structure, that new stability, that new standard in your life. Are you really mad at what the fuck's going on, or is it showing you that I'm still underdeveloped inside of this area? This is how I look at things all the time now. If I go into a space, my individual self, my individual relationship with myself, the tones that I've now met, I now have assessed the trauma, assessed these aspects of myself, and created these new values or my new tones. And my guidance of my feminine or my emotional intelligence is now in play. That's my atmosphere. See, because of my traumas, my atmosphere was always chaotic. I always thrived in chaotic situations. It was always, yeah, I can make that shit happen in a chaotic situation. I always could bring this falsehood of order to a chaotic situation. Always. And it always worked. But it was because I was avoiding how that space was created in the first place. So I use an example of me going like my old job, my last job, or any job that I worked. From training people to managing to all of these aspects. The reason that I looked so good inside of that space is because there was a falsehood. There was a falsehood of me, my attention of what I projected into that space. But it only existed based on motherfuckers not wanting to be at the house. The 9 to 5 mentality for myself was, as long as motherfuckers weren't doing it for themselves, I would do it for them. As long as motherfuckers weren't doing it for themselves, I'd do it for them. That's how I designed or said that's how I said I was the best. I was the best and I'm good and because I'm doing things in my mind, I'm saying I'm doing things other motherfuckers can't do. But in reality, in that lower aspect of myself, I was doing shit other motherfuckers didn't want to do. Or couldn't do. But as I sat in that recession, that emotional recessive point, that emotional recession with myself, assessing that space, then it changed and I was like, oh shit. There's a difference between me doing it because others can't do it and doing it because others won't do it. There was a difference between me doing things because people couldn't do it, and there was the difference between people that wouldn't do it versus the people that couldn't do it. There was a difference. And it was always based in the same basis of information. You can be loyal. I'm a good person because I'm loyal. I used to say that shit to myself all the time. I'm a good person because I'm loyal. But in reality, I didn't have emotional intelligence. I didn't have the emotional intelligence that I am humbled to have now. I had emotional intellect. What does emotional intellect look like? Emotional intellect looks like every time you go into a space, relationship, friendship, the first thing that you talk about is your trauma. The shit that you've been through, the shit that happened to you, the shit that you've been through, the shit that you going through. That's emotional intellect. You know how to intellectualize what has happened to you. You know how to intellectualize what has happened to you. You know how to establish the intellect or that foundation for you to continue reconditioning your environment. And then when you expand any further out, the relationship now becomes a falsehood. The relationship becomes a falsehood. The friendship is a falsehood. The job is a falsehood. Your environment is a falsehood. The first steps of you understanding that this shit was an illusion. That's the first step. Like, damn, this is when you have motherfuckers be like, all this is an illusion and all of this isn't real. All of this is inside of the matrix. But you're still denying the fact. You can intellectualize that what it is. But until you understand what it is and you went into that recession, that darkness, that void, then you cannot tap into the intelligence. That's the emotional intelligence. The emotional intellect is being able to talk or communicate or talk about your trauma. Talk at others with your traumas. That emotional intelligence is the comprehension of your trauma. The comprehension of what I've been through. Going through the mantra of this is my fault. My environment is a result of my reconditioning from my unresolved. So now I'm in a state of emotional intelligence. So now when you're going through this process, and when you go through this process, and this is when everything starts to fall apart, your life falling apart, shit ain't going the way it used to go, all that shit needs to happen. That's your recession. You need all that shit to happen. All that shit needs to happen. You need to lose the job. If you losing the job, you need to lose the job. You need to lose that house. That relationship needs to end. That friendship needs to end. The way that you've been holding on, the way that you've been making money needs to end. In order for you to actually come into the intelligence with yourself and actually give yourself the support that's necessary that you haven't been giving yourself. You've been getting recognition for what you do and what you're able to do for others, in lack of support to yourself. On the external aspect, that's why you'll sit there and be like, you want support, you just want somebody to support you. But then the moment that they actually start supporting you, support's going to come at discomfort. I don't know one piece of workout clothing or detox or system that once it's put into place, it does not first cause discomfort. I don't know not one system. I don't know not one. There's no system, no support structure that does not trigger some type of discomfort. If you go to pick out some workout clothes, the leggings, ladies, y'all know when y'all like to go grab the leggings and shit that lift your butt and shit. Fellas, we go grab the tights and the new shirts and shit. The sauna vest and the sauna shirts and the belts. That shit gonna make you uncomfortable as hell at first. You go to your new job right now. You get a new job right now. The first couple of days, even if you do not admit it, you uncomfortable as fuck because you don't know nobody. You don't want to talk to nobody. All that shit comes up. In that new relationship, friendship, you trying to see what you can say and what you can't say. But you got to think about it like this. If I'm always seeking something that's familiar, I would never have discomfort. If I'm always seeking the familiar, and I've been creating based on my traumatic experiences to get things that were familiar, what do you think I'm going to keep getting? What do you think I'm going to keep receiving? Eventually, even the shit that I used to love is going to start killing me. The shit that gave me the falsehood of being the best. The things that used to give me the falsehood of being the best and being this great person and being a good person, and is going to start killing me. I can't go back to what I used to do. I thought about it. I thought about it earlier in the month. I think about it every month just to reassess it. I'm like, with the way that I've structured my new life, structured my new becoming and my new space being in gratitude, I could go back and I could go get a job, but based on where I'm at now, it wouldn't last. It wouldn't last. It wouldn't last. It would burn out even faster. Because the things that I've learned now and I've implemented now, the way that I would use it would be different. The way that I would use it, the way that I would function with it would be different. The way that I function in relationships is different. With relationships, friendships, partnerships, anything that I'm doing is different now. It's not based on the old aspects of myself. I don't have the same I don't speak the same anymore. I don't talk the same. None of it. That old aspect of me no longer exists. That environment no longer exists for me. And I'm in gratitude for that. That if I go back to, because naturally when you start going back into these old spaces of yourself, if you're led to an old space of yourself, you'll know when you're inside of this new aspects of yourself, because when you go back into that space, it doesn't trigger you the same. That shit don't trigger me the same. Me being around people that I used to be around, that shit doesn't trigger me the same. The way that I'm inside my space with myself now, it doesn't trigger me the same. The things that I used to run away from in the aspects of escapism, I don't use them the same. One of the things that I used to use a lot of times, based on a lot of the traumatic experiences for us, was when you were at home, at your mom's house, your parents' house, at your people, wherever you was at, where you were being raised at, you use that as a way of escape. I never want to do this. I never want to do this. And you created a whole path based on escape. But since you were stuck in the aspects of escape, what would you do? Since that's unresolved. Since there was things at my mother's house, around my family that was unresolved. In order for me to exist in my current space at that time, some element of that needed to be in my space. Some element had to correspond with that space. This is when you start thinking about you in a relationship and the relationship ain't going good, or you're tired of attracting the childish type of nigga, the childish type of woman. But you got to realize with yourself, if I'm being tricked, I had to understand with myself, I keep attracting these childish people or immature people. It was only based on the reflection of my underdeveloped relationship with my inner child. For me, I attracted all types of, almost every chick that I attracted was almost all of the women, not all of my relationships, but most of my relationships, they had children. And I was always triggered to try to be the best father figure in that space because of my underdeveloped relationship with my reparenting my inner child from the aspects of how my pops and how my father and how my mother and the people that raised me were. It's underdeveloped. Every time you getting triggered, it's just letting you know something inside of you is underdeveloped. That's all. That's the body. That's like when you get to that point with yourself, you're like, damn, what about me is underdeveloped? What have I not developed? What thought did I have? What did I say that I needed, and why did I say that I needed it? I said I wanted to do what? You feel what I'm saying? Like, that's the shit that you keep getting fucked up with. That's the shit that keep fucking you up. Is because you're not looking at it and like, oh my God, well, I need to do this next. And I knew, think about the things that you feel like, oh my God, I keep getting cheated on. I give the best, like, I give them a place to live. And I remember giving motherfuckers a place to stay. And in that same instance, I'm like, damn, motherfuckers used all the toilet paper and used all this and did all this and eating all the groceries and doing all this shit, not cleaning up after themselves. And then I find myself sitting there they're not respecting the rules of my house because ultimately the rules that were given to me in where I came from, I didn't understand. I.e., so I didn't have to respect them. I didn't understand the basis of those rules. I didn't understand the basis of those rules. Why those rules were, how those rules were constructed, why they were saying the things they were saying, why my mom would act the way she would act, why my pops would act the way he would act, why they would do the things that they were doing. Because I was still seeing them as who they were. As, you should be my mom. You should be my dad. But I had no definition of what a mother or a father was. I didn't define that with myself. I didn't go. So now I put myself in constant states of recession. This is that emotional recession. Building your new structure, building your new space starts with inside of that mindset first. I don't care where you do it at and where you're doing it with. You're not looking for the results. You see the result, you're in gratitude for that result, and you keep moving forward, regardless of what the result is. That's how you can stay in this state of evolution, evolving and elevating. But if I'm always looking for, if every time, since because of the trauma, when I would get something in my life that gave me the attention or the recognition for all of my hard fucking work, you dig what I'm saying? Then what do you think would come up next? What do you think would happen next? I acknowledged it. Now it can change. Think about the particle theory. We all like to go into the particle theory. You know, when you look at something, and if you're not looking at it, it does one thing. When you look at it, it changes. That's what you keep doing inside of your life because you're expecting a certain result or an outcome. When you remove the result, when you remove the need for an outcome or a predeceived outcome, you get to see it for what it actually is. You get to understand it for what it actually is. You get to embrace it for what it actually is. As it starts to rain, it's starting to rain outside. It's okay. We're going to readjust ourselves. We're going to go in the crib. We're cleansing. We're cleansing. Cleansing, cleansing, cleansing. All right. Hold this can like this. Hold this like this. Go in like this. Walk in like this. Close that door. Y'all let me see. Y'all let y'all see me close the door. All right, we're going to walk this way. You know what? I'm going to sit here. I'm going to sit here. I ain't never sat here before. Let's sit here real quick. All right, let's sit here. All right. But yeah, as we're going through this process with ourselves, we're understanding these processes with ourselves, coming into this new reality with ourselves, understanding ourselves, bringing ourselves into this new space. We have to understand that we have to bring ourselves into this new understanding of we can't keep using the same old shit. We can't keep using the same old faculties or facilities to facilitate our narrative. I can't keep using the same old facilities to be my reason why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. I can't keep using the same shit. I couldn't keep using the same narrative that because of my mother did this, this, and this when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old, because ultimately I'm not learning anything. I'm simply just reconditioning. As long as I stay in this state of reconditioning and I stay in this state, okay, I'm going to keep reconditioning myself to be this way or reconfiguring myself to be this way, or I'm going to act this way, or maybe tomorrow I'll do this, or then I'll do this. I kept doing the same things over and over and over again. So when it came time basically, this is basically how this works. As long as I'm sitting inside of a space with myself and I'm using these same narratives, the reason I don't have this conversation is because of this, this, and this. It wasn't based on, in reality, getting what it was necessary. I would lose access to the accessory of the trauma. A lot of times we come into these spaces and we're so used to gaining the access through the accessory of that trauma. The accessory based on that trauma, the accessory based on what you've been through, the accessory of where you came from, you're used to accessorizing that and wearing that as that badge. And as long as I'm using that as my badge, I don't go anywhere. So now I have this falsehood, the projection that I went somewhere. So this is when you see most people in certain spaces, like you'll look at somebody, you're using the external narrative to set the tone to what is that process. Oh, because this is how we get stuck in other people's progress. So you'll look at somebody, use an example. I've been doing what I'm doing now publicly in a public sense for 3 years. I've been doing what I'm doing now in the public sense for 3 years. That means with establishing the company, establishing the platform, the brand, extending the services, and everything else is under that. I've been doing that for 3 years. I can't use what I used the last 15 years only based on experience. That's what gave me the footing to do this much in 3 years. To effectively be able to do what I've done in 3 years, it took me the lessons of 15 years to get to this point. That's where my gratitude is at. That's where my humility is at. That's where going through those emotional recession points came from. That's when everything fell apart. That's how I can go look back at, I can look at, be humble and be accepting and be happy for the points where I had no place to stay, had no place to go, had little to no money. I was walking everywhere. I could accept all of that the same way that I accepted I had the jobs. I had the bank accounts. And how I lost those bank accounts was because I was so stuck on never going back. I was so stuck on never going back. So hard stuck on not going back and this not happening. And I never want to go back to this. I never want to go see the struggle ever again, that I wasn't building anything. I put all of that energy into the projection. I put all of that energy into the projection. I put all of that energy into that relationship. I put all of that energy into that job. I put all of that energy into that because I was pulling from lack. So since I'm pulling from lack, my individual self, my relationship with myself in the individual sense was of lack. The relationship always had to lack something. So what am I attracting? Relationships. So the relationship was based on lack. So the tone was set based on lack. So the atmosphere or that feminine aspect, and let's break that down. Let's get into that. We're talking about these aspects of the masculine and the feminine in the aspects of that relationship. The only reason most of my relationships with my homeboys and friends and like people that I call my brothers at these points in time, the only reason that they existed for so long is because their lack of emotional intelligence. Their lack of emotional intelligence. Their lack of emotional intelligence, it raised my emotional intellect. Their lack of emotional intelligence raised my emotional intellect. So when you're thinking about the relationship, the friendships, whatever that collective aspect of yourself, you really got to look at that and really understand what tone and what atmosphere you set into that. I had to sit there and understand that the reason that the relationship was the way that it was because I was doing it from lack. I lacked the ability to comprehend the tone outside of that infatuation, outside of being the attention for me telling the story about me being in the street, telling the story of the fight that I got in, telling the story of an ex, telling the story of an old relationship, of things that I've been through. That infatuation set my tone. But I had no guidance in my own atmosphere. The atmosphere that I was used to. I was used to that chaotic atmosphere. So, of course, inside of my chaotic atmosphere, when my tones or my unresolved or the shit that I haven't been healing is going on, of course I can create this falsehood, which became the relationship, which became the friendship. So now naturally, this is how we break this down into that space. Thank you for joining. When I'm sitting inside of that space based on the relationships and the friendships that I'm creating, based on the emotional void, what do you think I'm creating? What do you think I'm creating based on the emotional void? Recognition. I damn sure was not. I wasn't creating support. I was creating recognition. Because then I had to go look back at all the conversations we were having. All of my conversations were based on recognition. All of them. Damn near 98% of them conversations were based on recognition. They were based on some form of recognition. I wanted to be recognized for, so the questions that I would ask would naturally be loaded. The questions that you ask become loaded. Think about that shit. You asking your homegirl or your homeboy, yo, man, was I wrong? I mean, I told her how I felt, and I told her how I really felt, and then she felt some type of way. Or I told him how I felt about the relationship and where the relationship was going, and then he wasn't listening to me. Girl, you weren't wrong. And what is the response you get back to it? Girl, you weren't wrong. Nigga, you gotta understand, these niggas out here don't really understand. They don't understand. These niggas is little boys and things of that nature. Dog, you ain't got to understand that these women out here is little boys and little girls, and they don't really understand shit. You're hearing the same shit over and over and over again for recognition of your environment, recognition of your traumatic experience. You're just seeking recognition from your traumatic experience. You seeking recognition of your experience of your life. That's all you were seeking. All I was seeking was recognition for that expectant experience. So every relationship mirrored one another. So at the end of every relationship, it was the same thing. And the only way, this is how you know you're stuck within that traumatic loop, because you only go back to the last relationship. You only go back to the last set of relationships. But if you really were started to go back, when I really started to go back and look at my relationship with myself and how I learned and developed my relationship with myself, and that it was based on my traumatic experiences, based on how I was raised, it was no longer generic. I couldn't use the generic. Staying on the last relationship, that's generic. Staying at the last job, that's the generic shit. That's the surface, or the generic. That's the runoff. It's only as real as you said it was. That last friendship or relationship, it was only as real as you said it was. Because they did this and they did this and they did this and they did this. Okay, write a list. This is one of the things I get in my clients. Look at your list of your relationships and write out the negatives and write out the positives. I've had clients that literally, after they wrote the third, after they got to like half of the fourth list, because I remember doing this list myself, that self-evaluation, they noticed that it was the same negatives in every list. And their positives were the same. See, here's the key with this. Going through the emotional recession, every time you come to a new space, the collective relationship, the tone changes based on what I was doing. Based on what I was doing, based on what I learned. So as I learned, one second. All right, we returned. So as I'm learning these new aspects of response versus reaction, as I'm learning the difference between response and reaction, I'm learning I'm developing how I now stand, or how I move, or how I'm speaking, or how I'm delivering myself inside of these relationships. The old relationships, which is aspects with family members, old friends, the way that I'm now responding inside of this space is not based within reaction anymore. It shouldn't be based in reaction. That doesn't deny that there might be a point of reaction inside of this space, or something's going to act out inside of this space. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But now my response is now different. Instead of me being the angry one all the time. I remember for a long period of time, and when it came to the aspects of my family, like just with my family in that general sense, I was the last person anybody wanted to have a conversation with, talk to, because I was the one that, like, yep, they call him, it's good. Now I had to really look at why I clung, or I was clinging to that. Because ultimately, I was clinging to that identity. As much as they were clinging to that identity in that collective relationship, I was clinging to it as well. And since I was clinging to that identity, every relationship needed that element. This is how you start looking and assessing it. Every relationship that I got in needed these elements in order for it to manifest what I needed for it to manifest. Remember, I told you before, like, when it comes to the state of manifestation, all of the senses got to be active. The sight, what you see, what you hear, what you touch, what you say, what you feel. All your senses got to be active. Or actually, it's what you see, your sight, or what you see. That means your type and all your type of people that you want to be around. The things that you like to hear with the things that you're used to hearing from these types of people, the things that you're used to touching with these types of people, the touch, that mental touch, that physical touch, the emotional touch is just not physical touch. We're going to get deep into that in the classes. First class, April 2nd. First class, April 2nd. Tantra and Healing, 888. Hit me up in the inbox. You're interested in getting into the classes. That aspects of that touch, the aspects of what I was smelling, the aroma, the allure, what happened, the pheromones, the energy, smelling that energy, down to tasting that energy. That's what manifested me inside of that space. These were based in trauma. So if my sight is only based in trauma, that means I'm only used to seeing traumatic experiences and traumatic reactions. Motherfuckers being angry, people. If I'm only used to seeing somebody loving me, understanding me, being around me, based on them being upset or being super emotional, that's what I would need. This is how I would make it feel real. If the person would only hear me when I was angry or when I was yelling, or I only could hear them through yelling, I didn't understand how to de-escalate a situation, that's what I needed to hear. If the taste of the energy was always chaotic, it was heavy, it forced me. Now I'm looking at how I'm eating. I'm eating heavy. Now I'm looking at I'm looking at what I'm eating, how often I'm eating, what I'm bringing in at the senses of my taste. Smoking, drinking, party, the environments that I go into. Then I'm going into the aspects of what I'm touching. All 5 of these aspects got to be online for me to manifest that space. I was manifesting through the trauma. I was manifesting through that trauma loop. So anything that matched that from my unresolved, the way my pops was, the way my mother was, the way my sisters were, the way anybody was that happened inside of my life, the traumatic, everything that was going on in my life, how people looked at me when I was on the street, how people looked at me when I was in the streets, everything from the clientele that I had came to me based on certain areas. They all had the same senses. They all had the same itch or the same twitch that led to us making transactions. That's how I lived inside of my life. I built an entire life based on that. My entire life of existence was based on that. So when I started going through the healing process, going into my internal work, my shadow work, going at war, going in here, sitting at these tables with myself in my darkness, of course, in the physical world, that shit would start to change. Now I'm like, oh shit, niggas ain't seeing me the same way anymore because I'm no longer in that space. The only thing that was constant about that space was me. And since I'm the only constant, the only thing that actually existed, and I'm no longer worried about perceptions. I'm in the aspects of my perspective. Remember, your perspective is only found inside of the darkness. My perspective is only found inside of the darkness. That's where my inner child is. My humility is only found inside of the darkness. That honesty with yourself is only going to be found when you sitting inside of that darkness. I can sit there and still say, I can sit there inside of the space with myself and be like, well, I'm supposed to be based on truth. Remember, I told you, we broke down what truth was. Truth, as long as I had a factor, the factor to balance my truth, I could stay within that space. So as long as I can keep saying women ain't nothing and There's no women out here that do this, and this, and this, and this. Even when I would get the image of a woman that was what I felt that was necessary, or that had the accessories. And we're talking about the accessories when I speak about accessories, I'm talking about the external aspect, and very little inspect inside themselves. I didn't know what to do with it because I didn't deal with the trauma that corresponded, the underlying emotional resource that brought them into my space. That emotional resource, that traumatic event, that lesson I haven't learned, that's what brought them into my space. It wasn't what I was doing externally. Because this gonna wear the fuck off. If I gotta put more light and try to maintain my physical look to maintain something inside of my space, and at no point in time I don't allow the emotional recession to decline, that means seeing me without my beard being conditioned, seeing me without my locks being conditioned, seeing me without this aspect, then it's only based into my traumatic response. See, that's why I don't. So then now I'm sitting there like, what's the real reason I couldn't keep that up? Because this becomes naturally being able to be done when you're inside of your space. This is when we go into the aspects of when you think about it like this. Every place, every house, everything that it tells you outside of yourself is, you go fill out a rent application right now. Even to a job application. Job application says you need at least 3 past places of employment. You need at least 3 references on a report. You need at least 3 times the income for any job. To go get a place, you need at least 3 times the amount of your income needs to be 3 times the amount. But something that simple, we never really think about. We get the one aspect, that's us. That one aspect becomes you. That's your emotional value. But since we're so stuck on looking for the external aspect, that means the other person, to be the other emotional resource. And then we use this aspect that's in between us, the relationship, the new space, the new job, whatever it is, that becomes the third resource. But this resource is set by the tone and the atmospheres of us. So if I'm not with myself, where I'm unified with myself, this is where we come into this is what I mean by that trinity of marrying yourself. Me, my masculine, my feminine, reparenting my inner child. That's my 3. Now that I'm in that unity with myself, now everything that I produce from that balanced state with myself, that becomes my 3rd. That becomes that child. That becomes that birthing aspect. That's what's going to be used to create that relationship. But when I'm so concentrating from that imbalanced state, that means I'm used to the trauma staying in play. Everything that I create is going to reflect lack. I'm birthing lack. I'm sustaining lack. I'm sustaining doubt. I'm sustaining the trauma. This is when you start sustaining that trauma because you're not really dealing with it. And then that becomes that emotional void. And the longer that you keep doing it, this is where we get into human experience. You having kids, whatever it is, whether it's you having a kid, you got a place, you got a car, you got a job, you got some new clothes, whatever it is, whatever you manifest, it's always going to be based upon lack. It's always going to be based upon lack. So you got to ask yourself that question. When it comes into this state of support to you, you wanting to come into this state of support, you have to understand, you have to recognize your trauma. You got to become familiar and understanding with these aspects. That's why I always stress it. You got to become familiar with the traumatic experiences, the things that you've been through. Not into the sense to recondition your environment to be that, but to relearn those patterns, those behaviors, the roots to these patterns, these behaviors, these temperaments, these sequences that you've lived your life in. Because until I understood those aspects of these sequences, every time that I move forward, it would be more of the same. Of course, it'd be more of the same. Every relationship that I ever had was going to be the same. Because I needed it. I wanted it that way. Because at the end of it, I can say, well, I was a good person. I did this and I did that and I did this. But if it was in true indeed, and that's truly what I was doing it for, from that balanced space, then I can accept when it goes away. I can accept it for what it is. I can see it. The only reason I can accept it for what it is because I'm not trying to relate to it. Therefore, I can expect nothing. I accept it for where it is. I accept it where I'm at, from where I'm at, and I only can provide from where I'm at. I only can provide from where I'm at. And I build from that space. You build from that space. Rather than you stuck in there, oh my God, my old life was so horrible. But yeah. You need this emotional recession. The only way that you can deal and face these aspects and deal with yourself is by going through this state of an emotional recession. The resources that you used that were based and rooted in your traumas are those points that are going to help you go through this healing process. This is another lesson in that aspect. Without that happening, you'll just keep repeating the shit over and over and over again. You're just going to be sitting there like, see, every time I get in a relationship, this happens. What is it telling you about the relationship with yourself? Why do you keep thinking that in 2.5 weeks, move this nigga, move this woman in? Why do you think in 2.5, 3.5 weeks, it's okay for you to jump into that space? Because you coming from lack. You coming from lack. You accepted the external or the perceptions of truth based on facts, based on the traumatic experience that connected to your ideal. Because in the truth of yourself, you exactly where you need to be. The reason you are where you are is to learn something. It's only your fear of learning that got you wanting to keep escaping, to keep avoiding, keep not dealing with. It's only your not setting that tone, not assessing the atmosphere that you created and the tones that you created that got you wanting to run around. It's time to start. It's time to start and continue. 3 things that I always say. Healing is destructive. You are deserving, but you are not entitled. This level of honesty is only going to be found inside of your darkness. I'm Papa Lucifer Samdi, spiritual life coach, co-therapist, psychoanalyst, so many other different monikers. But I'm your God. I'm here to guide. From this point is your ending. That means if you looked at the video, you about to look at this video, you're at the end of this video, this is your beginning. From this point, now it's time for you to be honest. Stop telling yourself the truth and be honest. One can be honest and truthful, but one can omit honesty when stuck in aspects of their truth. I could not deny my truth once I became honest. But I could keep denying being honest with myself to protect my old truth. I love you. We love us. Ashe.